I was 8 years old the day my uncle sold me for 50 pieces of silver. 8 years old when I learned that blood ties could be priced, that innocence could be traded like worn fabric in the marketplace of monsters. The sound of the silver dropping into his palm wasn't money, it was my heartbeat being counted out. My name is Lyra, and this is how I rose from chains and ash to become the Luna they feared, the one they should have never tried to cage. Rain slashed against the broken walls of the old Roman marketplace, and I ran barefoot through the mud, my toes sinking into the cold, sticky earth with every desperate step. My chest was heaving, lungs screaming for air that felt like it would never come. The chains around my wrists clinked with every movement, a cruel metallic rhythm that matched the panic hammering through my veins. Behind me, the men who had bought me were shouting my name, their voices sharp, filled with greed and venom. They had taken everything from me, even the meaning of my own name, and now they chased me as if I were nothing more than a cursed shadow they could tear apart. I stumbled behind a shattered column, gripping it for balance. My dress was soaked through, torn in places where the storm and the fight had ripped at it, clinging to me in a way that offered no protection from the cold, the pain, the fear. My hands burned where the shackles had rubbed my skin raw, streaks of blood blending with the rainwater to leave shimmering lines across my arms. For a brief, impossible moment, I thought I saw it glint silver, like fire beneath my skin. Something wild, ancient, and untamed stirred inside me, screaming to be freed. But I couldn't let it. If they saw what I was, really saw me, they would kill me. And not just hurt me. Kill me. I pressed my forehead against the jagged stone, letting the rain wash over my face, mingling with tears I couldn't stop. I was only 8, but I had learned fear the way others learned their alphabet. Every sound, the slap of rain, the clink of my chains, the distant roar of thunder, was a threat. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, something else found its way to me, a voice. Soft, almost too delicate to hear over the storm, yet urgent. Find the flame, child of silver. I froze. The voice wasn't outside. It wasn't carried on the wind, it wasn't the men, it wasn't even the thunder. It was inside me. My own heartbeat carried it, thrumming against my ribs, telling me there was something I hadn't yet understood. Something I had to find. Something that could save me, or destroy me. I swallowed hard, tasting the iron tang of my own blood in my mouth, and I forced my legs to move again. The mud tried to pull me down, tried to trap me in place, but I ran anyway, faster than my small body had any right to move. Every step was agony. My feet were bleeding, my muscles screamed in protest, but my fear had sharpened me into something else entirely. I wasn't just running. I was surviving. I was hunting, even if I didn't yet know what I was hunting for. Lightning split the sky above me, blinding for a heartbeat. I saw the ruined marketplace stretch around me. Broken stalls, scattered coins, jagged wood jutting from the ground like teeth. It all shimmered in the stormlight, harsh and ghostly, and for a second, I felt like the world itself was watching me, testing me, daring me to rise above the fear, above the pain, above the men who thought they could own me. My hand slipped on the wet stone as I climbed over a toppled stall, and I cried out, a sharp, desperate sound that the storm swallowed immediately. My chains rattled violently, catching on the splintered wood, tearing my wrists further, but I didn't stop. Every nerve in my body was alive with terror and exhilaration, a brutal combination that left me dizzy, trembling, and sharp-eyed. I could hear them closing in. Their shouts were less distant now, filled with rage. They would catch me. They had to. And yet, something inside me hummed with a power I hadn't dared to touch before. I pressed my hands against the mud, my palms slick and cold, and pushed myself up again. I ran blindly through the maze of ruins, every instinct screaming at me to survive, to escape, to hide, to find that voice that called me from within. I felt it more than heard it now, the pulse beneath my ribs, the wild, feral thing that belonged only to me, shaking against its cage. The men were relentless, stomping through the mud like hunters who had finally sensed their prey's fear. I could see the shadows of their figures in the flashes of lightning, distorted and monstrous, and for the first time, I hated my own body for being so small, so weak, so vulnerable. But then I felt it, the thing inside me that had waited, patient, quiet, sleeping through years of pain and torment. It was awake now, stirring like a storm beneath my skin. My blood, my silver-tinged blood, seemed to hum with its rhythm, and I realized with a shocking clarity that this wasn't just survival anymore. This was awakening. I stumbled again, falling to my knees in the muck. The chains bit deeper into my wrists, tearing fresh ribbons of skin, but I didn't scream. Not yet. I lifted my head, gasping, rain stinging my eyes, and I saw it, a flash of movement beyond the ruins. Something unnatural, silver, alive. My pulse jumped. Could it be real, or was my mind fracturing under fear and exhaustion? I couldn't stop to wonder. I had to move. I had to run. And then it happened. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ground beneath me, a sound that wasn't storm or footfall, that didn't belong in the chaos around me. My ears caught it, trembling, instinctively alert, and I felt it in my chest, my stomach, my bones. Something in me responded. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting for this very moment. I pressed myself into the mud, heart hammering, trying to control the wild, pulsing energy rising beneath my skin. If I let it out now, it could save me. Or it could destroy everything. I closed my eyes and let the voice guide me, let the pulse inside me guide me. Find the flame, child of silver, I whispered it aloud, my own voice trembling, fragile yet defiant. I didn't know what the flame was, didn't know how it could help, didn't know if I deserved it, but I knew one thing, I had to try. Because if I didn't, I would die. And I refused. I refused to let them take me. I refused to let the chains define me. I refused to let fear own me the way it had owned me for so long. I pushed off the ground, slipping, sliding, my hands raw and bleeding, my legs shaking, and I ran again, faster this time, desperate, desperate, desperate. The rain didn't stop. The storm didn't pause. But I didn't care. I was alive. And that mattered. That was enough, for now. Every step carried me closer to something I didn't understand but trusted with every fiber of my being. Every breath I drew filled me with raw, desperate energy. Every heartbeat sang with the promise of power I hadn't dared dream I could hold. And above all, the whisper inside me persisted, patient, persistent, guiding, coaxing, find the flame, child of silver. I knew I couldn't run forever. I knew the men would catch me if I didn't find a way to fight back, to disappear, to unleash what was waiting inside me. But for the first time I didn't feel hopeless. For the first time I felt ready. The storm roared around me, mud clinging to my skin, rainwater washing the blood from my hands in streaks of silver and red. And deep in the marrow of my bones, I felt it, the spark. The fire. The ancient thing that had waited, patient and quiet, through everything they had done to me. And I knew, without doubt, that I had been born for this moment. I wasn't just a child who had been sold, a victim left to rot in the mud. I was more. I was something untamed, something dangerous, something alive. And as I ran, as the lightning painted the ruins in stark, unforgiving light, I let myself believe, for the first time, that I could survive. That I could rise. That I could be more than the chains, more than the pain, more than the men who thought they owned me. I would find the flame. I would rise from the chaos. I would awaken the wild, ancient thing inside me. And nothing, not the storm, not the men, not even the world itself, would ever control me again. The world had barely registered his presence before I felt it, the sudden shift, the sharp drop in temperature, the way the storm seemed to pause just for him. Out of the fog, a horse appeared, black as the night itself, slick with rain, muscles taut beneath its shining coat. Its eyes caught the lightning, molten gold, glowing like fire trapped in shadow. And he rode it as if the wind obeyed him, the storm bending around his movements rather than fighting them. He dismounted slowly, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world, though I felt the seconds stretching into eternities. Broad-shouldered, tall, cloaked in dark folds that seemed almost to absorb the rain, he moved with a predator's grace. At his side, wolves emerged from the mist. I froze, expecting snarls, teeth, claws, but they didn't attack. They bowed. They circled him, obedient and watchful, their eyes reflecting the same golden fire as his. When his gaze met mine, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. My heart leapt, thrummed, faltered. Everything in me screamed to run, to hide, but some deep, unexplainable part of me, part of that wild thing under my skin, paused. Time stilled around him. His eyes, molten gold and impossibly deep, held me captive. "Lyra," he said. My name fell from his lips like a prayer, hushed and reverent, yet carrying a weight I couldn't place. I shivered. "How do you know my name?" My voice was a cracked whisper, half fear, half disbelief. "I've been watching you," he said quietly, and there was no malice in it, only a measured calm. "Since the day they marked you." The words struck me like lightning. Someone had seen me. Someone had known I existed. And yet, why now? Why here? My legs wanted to carry me away, back into the ruins, back into the storm, back into whatever fleeting safety I could grasp. But before I could move, his hand was on my wrist. Warm, steady, and unnervingly strong. "You're bleeding," he murmured, his voice low, cutting through the roar of the storm and the pounding of my own heart. "They'll smell it soon. Come with me if you want to live." I wanted to recoil, to pull away, to demand he leave me alone. Every fiber of my being screamed distressed. But something in his eyes, the gold that shimmered in the stormlight, stopped me. They weren't just gold. They were familiar, as though they had always known me, even before I knew myself. I followed, almost without thinking, my steps hesitant, uneven. Each stride left prints in the mud, each breath was ragged, mixing with the storm, with the metallic taste of my own blood. And still, I didn't speak. I couldn't. My chest was too tight, my mind too full of fear and confusion. He moved beside me effortlessly, not too close, not too far, giving space yet radiating a presence I couldn't ignore. The wolves flanked him silently, padding over the mud with a predator's grace. I caught glimpses of them, silver-fanged and golden-eyed, and for a moment, terror rose in my chest again. But even then, I felt no threat from them. There was loyalty in their movements, obedience, a silent understanding of something I didn't yet comprehend. The fog swirled around us, mist curling like fingers through the ruins, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. Every step we took seemed to shift the world around me. Stones glimmered in the rain, broken wood shimmered with silver, even the air tasted different, charged, alive. It was as though the storm itself had chosen him as its center, and I was being drawn toward that center, whether I wanted to or not. "Why are you helping me?" I asked finally, voice barely audible, almost swallowed by the wind. "You don't even know me." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down at my bleeding wrists, then back into my eyes. "I know enough," he said softly, and the words hit me with an unexpected weight. There was something in the way he said it, something that hinted at shared understanding, at knowledge of things no one else could see. "They marked you for a reason. I won't let them finish what they started." I shivered, not just from the cold, not just from the rain, but from the raw intensity of his presence. There was danger in him, undeniably, something that screamed power and dominance. But there was also protection. Something I hadn't felt in years, something I didn't think I was allowed to feel. And yet, here it was, in the warmth of his hand, in the unwavering fire of his gaze. The wolves shifted around him, low growls vibrating through the ground, subtle, almost imperceptible. But I felt it in my chest, in the pit of my stomach. They were ready for him. Ready to obey. Ready to defend. And I realized, in a shattering instant, that I was not just being saved by a man. I was being claimed, watched over, and tested in ways I couldn't yet understand. I wanted to ask his name, wanted to demand answers, wanted to make him swear he wasn't a danger to me. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was something primal in the way he moved, something that bypassed fear, bypassed logic, and went straight to the part of me that was wild, feral, desperate to be free. He led me through the ruins, the wolves flanking him like living shadows. Every step carried us further from the men, further from the chains, further from everything I had known and feared. And yet, I didn't feel safe, not completely. Not yet. Because even as he protected me, even as his presence cut through the storm like a beacon, I felt a flicker of unease. He was powerful, undeniably so. And power, I had learned, was dangerous. I glanced at him, at the gold in his eyes, and felt an unexpected stir of something I couldn't name, curiosity, awe, fear, and something else. Something like recognition. He wasn't just a stranger. There was history in him, history I didn't understand, a connection that pulsed beneath the surface, waiting for me to notice. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly, almost to himself, almost rhetorical, but the words hung in the air between us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My entire being screamed no, screamed yes, screamed run, screamed stay, all at once. I didn't know the answer. I only knew I had no choice but to follow. His hand still held mine, firm but gentle, guiding, steadying. The fog deepened, curling around us, hiding the path ahead, hiding dangers I could not yet see. But even in that uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of purpose. He hadn't saved me just to lead me somewhere safe. He had saved me because he knew. He knew something about me, something I hadn't yet dared to face. And that knowledge, that recognition, was terrifying in its intimacy. As we moved through the ruins, I felt my pulse quicken, not from the storm, not from the men who still searched for me, but from him. From the way he looked at me, from the weight of his presence, from the undeniable sense that he had seen me, truly seen me, before anyone else ever could. And in that moment, I realized that fear and fascination were intertwined, that the danger he carried was inseparable from the pull he exerted over me. We paused briefly behind a toppled wall, rain plastering our hair and clothes, hearts hammering, breaths ragged. His gaze held mine, unwavering. "They won't stop," he said simply. "But neither will I. Not for you." And I felt it then, the first flicker of something I had thought lost forever. Connection. Recognition. A fragile thread stretching between us in the storm, delicate yet undeniable. My mind screamed caution, my body screamed fear, but my heart, wild, desperate, feral, acknowledged the truth. He was not just my savior. He was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, something I would never be able to ignore. The storm raged on, lightning flashing and rain biting at our skin. The wolves circled, silent and watchful. And I, soaked, bleeding, trembling, and utterly alive, followed him. Not because I trusted him fully, not yet, but because in that golden gaze, in that quiet certainty, I saw a chance to survive. A chance to awaken. A chance to rise. And that was enough. I used to believe birthdays meant something. I thought they were for celebration, for candles and laughter, for small joys that no one could take away. The first one I remember was hollow. The day my mother died giving birth to me was the day my uncle began calling me cursed. I didn't understand the weight of that word then. I only knew the sharpness in his voice, the way his eyes didn't see me as a child, only as a debt, a mistake, a coin to be traded. By the time I turned 8, he led me to the market square in chains, and I realized the world could be cruel in ways I had no language to describe. He presented me to the guards, a trembling, soaked bundle of flesh and fear, and they took no notice of the storm raging inside me. The crowd surrounded us, leaning in to see, voices sharp with mockery, eyes scanning every inch of me as if I were livestock, as if the way I shivered could be bought and sold like grain or silver. I felt every pair of eyes burn into me, dissecting me, deciding my value with no regard for who I was inside. I remember the sound of silver, the jingle of coins, 50 of them, passing from greedy fingers to my uncle's palm, a payment for my soul. My soul had weight, but they measured it in coins. The forest blurred past as we rode, rain dripping from the branches and pooling in the hollows of fallen leaves. My wrist stung where the chains had once been, though they were gone now. The alpha riding beside me did not speak. He never did, not yet. But I felt his gaze on me, a constant pressure that made the hair on my arms rise, that made the weight in my chest shift. He wasn't just looking, he was searching, probing for something buried deep inside me. I sensed it like a pulse beneath my skin, a recognition of the ghost I carried, the fragments of a girl who had been stolen and sold before she had even learned to walk properly in the world. Every sound of the forest seemed amplified in the quiet between us. The wind through the leaves, the distant crack of thunder, the slap of hooves against the mud, they all carried my heartbeat alongside them. I tried not to shiver, tried not to let the memory of the market square claw its way up from the depths of my mind, but it always did. The jeers, the coins, my uncle's face twisted in satisfaction, the guards' indifferent eyes, they all followed me, ghosts I could not shake. He shifted slightly on his horse, and though he spoke no words, I felt the weight of him beside me, steady and unyielding, like a wall I could cling to without touching. His presence was a contradiction. It frightened me because it was so strong, so certain, so unrelenting, but it also made the wild thing inside me lean closer to the surface, pressing, impatient, demanding acknowledgement. I had lived so long in fear, in hiding, in chains both physical and invisible. And now, something unspoken between us promised a release, though I did not know the shape it would take, nor the cost it would demand. I thought of my mother, though the image was fleeting and fragile, like smoke slipping through my fingers. I never knew her touch, never felt her voice in my ears. I only knew the absence, the space that my uncle had filled with cruelty. He had taught me that love could not exist for me, that every warmth would be replaced with betrayal, that the world was nothing but a marketplace where everything had a price, and I had already been counted, weighed, and sold. Every step deeper into the forest felt like crossing into another life, a life I was not sure I deserved. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but the pain was familiar, almost comforting. It was proof that I was still alive, proof that the chains and the storm and the men who had bought me had not claimed me entirely. And yet, the ache inside me, the hollow that no one had filled, that no one could fill, pulsed with a relentless reminder of everything I had lost, everything I had been denied. The alpha remained silent, but I felt him move closer when the path narrowed, as if anticipating my hesitation, my fear. His hand never touched me, never needed to, and still his presence tethered me to a fragile sense of safety. It was maddening and thrilling all at once. I wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to push away the stirrings of curiosity and the almost unbearable pull I felt toward him. But I could not. I could not abandon this fragile tether, this promise that someone with the strength of the forest itself, was willing to see me, to hold me, to protect what the world had tried to destroy. Memories flooded me like a river, unbidden and relentless. I remembered nights in the dark, hiding from my uncle, listening to the distant laughter of other children while I shivered under the weight of his anger. I remembered the sting of his words, the sharp crack of his whip, the times I had begged for mercy and found none. I remembered the silver in the market square glinting in the sun as the crowd laughed, and the way I had felt the first time I understood that the world would not see me as I was, but only as what it could take from me. The forest seemed to lean closer as if it listened, as if it recognized my history, my pain, my hunger for something beyond survival. My pulse quickened with every step, and I realized the storm inside me, the feral fire that had slept for so long, was no longer silent. It throbbed beneath my ribs, demanding attention, demanding release, and demanding acknowledgement that I was more than the chains, more than the coins, more than the girl my uncle had tried to erase. The alpha's horse stepped softly beside mine, almost as if it, too, understood the unspoken weight between us. The wolves moved with him, their golden eyes glinting, reflecting some part of the storm, some part of the wild in me that recognized them as kin without question. I had never known the touch of loyalty, of reverence, of something unbroken and unyielding. I had never known that a being could move through the world with such power and yet hold a space for another to exist without crushing them. Every step forward made the memories sharper, more pressing, yet also made the possibility of release closer. The chains of the past, the market square, the coins, my uncle's cruel face, all of it pressed against me in waves, but they no longer had the same claim. I was running, bleeding, alive, and for the first time, I felt a pull toward something I could not yet name but could feel with every cell. It was promise, it was danger, it was awakening. The Alpha never spoke again, yet every glance, every shift of his posture, every subtle tension in the reins communicated something I understood without words. He recognized the mark, the spark, the fire I carried, and he carried something in himself that acknowledged it, that fed it, that did not fear it. I realized, in the quiet between the pounding of hooves and the whisper of rain through the trees, that he was more than a savior. He was the mirror I had never seen, reflecting not who I had been forced to be, but who I could become. The forest thickened, shadows pressing closer as night threatened to fall, but I did not falter. The wind carried the scent of rain, of earth, of the wolves, and of him. It carried the promise of change, of survival, of fire finally freed from the cage of chains. The weight inside me shifted, the memories of pain and loss folding into something heavier, something that demanded recognition and acknowledgement. I could feel the pulse in my veins, stronger now, more insistent, responding to him as if our fates had always been intertwined. I remembered the coins again, the crowd, the market square, the jeers, the chains. And for the first time I did not feel small. I did not feel sold. I felt the beginnings of power, of identity, of awakening. I felt the wild pulse in my blood stir, and I knew that the world that had tried to erase me was not finished, but neither was I. I had survived storms, men, and chains, and I would survive him, survive the fire inside me, survive the awakening that had begun the moment the Alpha had appeared. And even in my brokenness, even in the ache of memory, I felt a fragile, undeniable truth settle inside me. I was not nothing. I was not a coin, not a curse, not a shadow of fear. I was fire and silver, storm and wild, and the forest, the wolves, and the Alpha who rode beside me had seen it. They had acknowledged it. They had called it forth. And I knew, with every trembling, ragged breath, that my story was only beginning. I followed him through the winding paths of the mountains, my legs heavy, muscles burning, my chest aching from the cold and the constant rhythm of fear and adrenaline. The rain had stopped, but the mist clung to everything, curling around the jagged cliffs and ancient trees like smoke, hiding the path ahead in a gray veil that made the world feel smaller, as if we had left the ordinary earth behind. Every step carried me further from the life I had known, the chains, the market, my uncle, and closer to something I could not yet name but felt pressing against the edges of my soul. He moved with the grace of a predator, effortless and sure, every motion measured, every glance calculated. The wolves flanked him, silent, their eyes gold and attentive, reflecting the faint glimmers of the fading light. I could hear their breathing, soft and controlled, and it made my own pulse thrum faster. There was a power here, ancient and alive, and it filled the spaces between us, pressing against my ribs, and setting fire to the hollow ache I carried inside. I had survived so much, yet nothing had prepared me for the weight of the world pressing against me now in the form of him, of the wolves, of the mountains themselves. The temple emerged from the mist like a vision. Carved entirely from stone, worn smooth by centuries yet untouched by decay, it rose against the sky like a monument to time itself. Symbols were etched deep into the walls, moons, wolves, and flames intertwined in patterns that seemed to shift if I looked too long. The air smelled of damp stone, ancient earth, and something else, something metallic and bright that made my stomach twist and my veins hum. My hands itched to touch the walls, to feel the pulse of them beneath my fingers, as if the stones themselves carried the memory of everything that had happened here long before I existed. I pressed my hand to the closest symbol, tracing the curve of the wolf, the crescent of the moon. The stone beneath my fingertips vibrated faintly, warm to the touch. And then it happened. The symbols glowed beneath my fingers, silver light spilling outward, flowing across the stone like ripples on water. I gasped, jerking my hand back, the heat of it startling me, the light reflecting in my eyes until I thought I might be blinded by its intensity. The Alpha did not move. He watched me with reverence, with fear, with something deeper that I could not name. His golden eyes, always so impossibly vivid, were wide, fixed on me, almost as if he were watching a flame leap from the ashes of the world itself. "The Temple of Seriphus," he whispered, the words almost lost in the wind, almost too fragile to hold the weight they carried. "Home of the first Luna Queen." The name hit me like a strike to the chest. I felt it in my stomach, in my chest, in the hollow where my fear had lived for so long. Something stirred inside me, a memory that was not mine but felt as though it had been waiting in the marrow of my bones. Flashes of silver fire, a woman crowned in light, wolves kneeling at her feet, the power radiating from her in waves that I could feel through the soles of my feet. It was terrifying, overwhelming, and undeniably real. I stumbled backward, my hands trembling, my breath ragged. The temple seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and I felt as though it were breathing through me, as though the centuries of waiting, of watching, of longing, were stored in these stones and now recognized me. I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest, a demand and a promise intertwined. He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat of his body even through the space between us. He did not speak immediately. He let the light of the temple dance across my face, across the blood and mud and silver-tinged tears, and in that silence I felt the first tremor of something terrifying and wonderful, recognition. "You bear her mark," he said finally, his voice low and reverent, almost broken with emotion, the kind that made me want to curl in on myself or leap into his arms, and yet I could not decide which. "The mark of the silver flame." I shook my head violently, as if denying it could make it false, as if telling myself it was impossible could undo the pulse in my blood, the ache in my chest, the fire in my veins. "No," I whispered, voice cracking, breath trembling. "I'm just a girl who was sold. I'm nothing more." His eyes softened but did not lose their intensity. He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking, the mist swirling around his boots, the wolves shifting, silent, waiting, as though every movement we made mattered in ways I could not yet comprehend. "No, Lyra," he said, the sound of my name like a spell, a key, a tether to something I had long forgotten. "You are the one they feared would return." I felt my knees buckle slightly, and I had to grip the nearest stone to steady myself. The words echoed inside me, rolling over the memory of chains, of coins, of a marketplace full of jeering faces. They feared me. They feared what I carried. They feared the fire inside me, the thing that had always been untamed, even when I did not yet know it existed. The light from the symbols on the walls pulsed again beneath my fingertips, reacting to the rapid thrum of my pulse, as if the temple itself recognized the awakening within me. I felt heat rise in my chest, a pressure building, a rhythm that matched the wild pulse in my veins. My blood, tinged silver, seemed to ignite under my skin, and I shivered, not from cold, but from the raw, untapped power that stirred beneath the fragile skin of my ribs. The wolves shifted again, circling slowly, silent guardians. I could feel their eyes on me, every movement of their bodies precise, alert, almost anticipating what the temple had awakened in me. I had never felt such recognition, such reverence, such expectation. Every fiber of my being trembled, my mind reeling, my body aching from the past and the present collapsing into a single, trembling moment of possibility. He extended a hand toward me, not touching, merely offering a space to step closer. I felt the pull in my chest, the magnetic tug of destiny that I could not deny. The fear and the longing collided inside me, a storm as feral and raw as the blood that had once been spilled for a debt I never agreed to pay. And in that collision I realized something I had never dared whisper even to myself. I was not nothing. I was not the girl my uncle had tried to erase. I was fire. I was silver. I was the pulse of an ancient line, a legacy of power that had slept for centuries and now recognized me as its heir. The temple seemed to breathe with me, the walls glowing brighter, the symbols rippling like water under my gaze. My chest rose and fell in rhythm with it, every inhale a reminder of survival, every exhale a promise of awakening. The Alpha remained still, steady, golden eyes fixed on me, unyielding, carrying reverence, fear, and something deeper, something unspoken yet heavier than the mountains themselves. The mist swirled around us, the forest beyond the mountains pressing in with shadows, and I felt the weight of history, the weight of prophecy, settle into the hollow space in my chest where fear had lived for so long. I was no longer the girl who had been sold. I was no longer defined by chains, by coins, by cruelty. I was a spark, a flame, a force the world had not reckoned with. I was the child of silver, the heir to the Luna Queen, and the moment of awakening had begun. The Alpha shifted slightly, closer still, and I felt the subtle heat of his body, the power and the quiet of him, the promise that this was only the beginning. The wolves pressed closer, silent and watchful, reflecting back the pulse that now roared in my veins, and I realized that nothing in the world could prepare me for what was to come. The temple, the prophecy, the mark, the fire inside me. They were all part of a destiny I could not yet fully grasp, but I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I was ready. The mountains seemed to lean in, the wind whispering through the peaks, the mist curling around stone and bone, and I felt the silver flame stir, flickering and trembling, demanding recognition, demanding release. My fingers itched to touch the symbols again, to feel the pulse, to let it flow through me, to claim what had been mine before the world ever noticed I existed. The Alpha watched, still and patient, golden eyes unwavering, and I felt it then, the first raw, unfiltered connection between the fire inside me and the world outside, between the prophecy and the flesh, between what had been stolen and what was finally coming home. Every shiver of power, every beat of blood, every flash of silver in the light, confirmed what I had always feared and hoped for. I was not alone. I was not broken. I was awakening. The fire inside me flared, subtle at first, then more insistent, licking the edges of my mind, my heart, my pulse. It was dangerous, magnificent, terrifying. I could feel the history of Luna Queens, the legacy of power and wolves, the weight of prophecy settling around my shoulders like a mantle I had never asked for yet could not refuse. I breathed deeply, tasting the silver on my tongue, feeling it ignite beneath my skin, and I understood finally, completely, that the girl who had been sold was gone. In her place stood something older, something wilder, something alive. The Alpha's gaze did not waver, and I did not need words. The silence between us carried understanding, reverence, and the promise that nothing, no man, no chain, no storm, could undo what had begun. The temple of Seriphus had recognized me, the mark had awoken, and I felt, deep in the marrow of my bones, that my destiny had finally caught up to me. I had survived the world. I had survived the storm. I had survived myself. And now I would rise. The air shifted suddenly, a tension that wrapped around my skin like icy fingers, making every nerve in my body scream alert. Then I heard it, a howl that split the silence of the temple and shattered the fragile calm I had felt moments before. Dozens of them, echoing off the stone and the mountains beyond, a chorus of fury and bloodlust that rattled my chest and made the hair on my arms rise. They had found us. The hunters, the men who had once owned me, the men who had always believed they could contain the world, were coming. They poured into the ruins like a tide of iron and malice. Their armor clanged with every step, silver chains swinging, torches burning in the dark. The smell of fire, smoke, and sweat hit me first, followed by fear that coiled tight in my stomach. My pulse accelerated, the memories of the market square, the coins, the chains, crashing into me like waves. I had run before, but never with this weight, never with the knowledge that they would not stop, that they had come for more than control, they had come for annihilation. Cassian shifted beside me. The movement was fluid, horrifying, beautiful. His bones seemed to melt and reshape beneath his skin, his body elongating, muscles coiling and snapping into something impossible. In seconds, he was no longer human. He was a wolf, massive and radiant, black as midnight with streaks of gold rippling across his fur like molten sunlight. His eyes retained that fire, that molten intensity, and yet they were sharper now, more dangerous, more alive. I had never seen power like this. I had never seen a creature so raw, so magnificent, so impossibly alone. The wolves at his side mirrored him, their movements synchronized, a single breathing, lethal organism ready to defend, ready to kill. My stomach twisted, a cocktail of awe, fear, and something strange and thrilling that prickled through me like electricity. Every instinct I had screamed to hide, to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. The hunters were on us, and I could feel their greed, their hatred, their certainty that they could claim what they wanted, as if the world would bend for them once again. Then a hand clamped down on me, rough and metallic, yanking me forward. Panic surged, primal and sharp, breaking the fragile cage around my chest I had been holding together for months. I struggled, kicking, twisting, screaming, but the chains bit into my wrists, a cruel reminder of all the times I had been small, helpless, trapped. And then something inside me broke. Silver fire erupted from my hands. It wasn't a flicker, a timid spark. It was a roar, a force of light that poured from my fingers in molten waves, wrapping around the iron chains and the hands that had grabbed me. The flames burned, yes, but they did not consume. They purified, they cleansed, they ripped the air itself with their intensity. The chains melted, the armor of the hunters hissed and warped, their screams slicing through the rain-soaked air. I had expected fear to rise in me, expected terror to claim me fully, but instead there was an exhilaration, a raw, terrifying clarity. The world around me dissolved into chaos. Metal bent, wood splintered, torches extinguished as if afraid of the light erupting from me. The hunters scrambled, tripping over debris, eyes wide with disbelief, with horror, with something I could not name. And through it all, Cassian remained, colossal and untamed, moving with a predator's precision, protecting, killing, commanding without words, yet leaving me space to claim the fire I had unleashed. When it ended, the ruins were quiet, trembling, holding on to the echoes of the screams and the silver fire that still lingered in the air. I stared down at my hands, trembling, glowing faintly, the remnants of the power slowly ebbing but not gone. My chest heaved, lungs on fire, and adrenaline throbbed in my temples. I felt like I had become both weapon and storm, an impossible force that the world had never expected, never prepared to face. Cassian crouched beside me, shifting back into his human form, wet, dark, golden eyes still ablaze. He looked at me as if he were seeing not just a person, but something greater, something uncontainable, something almost divine in its emergence. His hand hovered near mine, almost reaching, almost touching, but he did not. His breath came in shallow pulls, but his eyes held a reverence that was terrifying in its intensity. "What did you do?" His voice was low, trembling, unsteady, the human words almost fragile against the magnitude of what had happened. The awe in his gaze mirrored the chaos I had left in the ruins, the power I had unleashed, the thing I did not yet understand about myself. I looked down at my hands, still faintly glowing, silver light coursing like liquid fire beneath my skin, illuminating the dirt and blood and rain. "I don't know," I whispered, voice ragged, raw, shaking, because the truth was I could not name it, could not control it, could not explain it. I only knew that something ancient, something primal, had answered, and I had been its vessel, its flame, its storm. Cassian reached out then, hesitating, the motion deliberate, cautious, yet full of a promise I could feel in my bones. His fingers brushed mine lightly, and in that touch, brief as it was, I felt a tether, a recognition, a pull that anchored the chaos surging inside me. The wolves circled us, silent, eyes glowing, their presence a steady, watchful force that reminded me I was not alone, that I had allies, that I was part of something larger than fear, larger than survival. I wanted to ask if I had killed them all, if the hunters would rise again, if this power would consume me next, but my voice failed, strangled by the intensity, the exhilaration, and the raw terror that still buzzed through my veins. The ruins seemed alive around us, charred stone, twisted metal, the faint smell of ozone and smoke, and the remnants of firelight reflecting in every puddle. I felt the world tilt, the storm and mist pressing in on every side, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. Cassian's gaze held me, unwavering, unwavering, and I realized then that the fear in me was not only for the hunters or the storm or the chaos. It was fear of myself, of what I had just become, of the raw, impossible force that had answered my desperation. The Alpha did not flinch, did not recoil, did not hesitate. He only saw me. truly saw me. And that recognition, that acceptance, that silent acknowledgement, terrified me more than the fire or the hunters ever could. The wolves shifted again, moving closer, circling the edges of the ruin, their golden eyes reflecting the silver light still lingering in the air. I felt their presence like a heartbeat at my back, steady, patient, feral, reminding me that this power, this fire, this awakening was not mine alone. It was shared, ancient, a legacy, a bond that ran through blood, through silver, through flame, through the bones of the mountains themselves. I took a tentative step forward, silver light ebbing but still humming through my veins, the air around me trembling with the remnants of its force. My chest heaved, lungs burning, and yet I felt an exhilarating, terrifying freedom I had never known. I had survived chains, fear, cruelty, and now I had survived power itself, something I did not yet understand but could not deny. Cassian knelt beside me, golden eyes scanning every flicker of light across my skin, every tremor in my fingers, every shiver that ran through me. His hand hovered near mine again, and I felt the pull of him, of the Alpha, of something primal and undeniable connecting us in ways I could not yet name, something that tethered the storm in me to the fire in him, to the pulse of wolves, to the mountain, to the temple, to the destiny I had only begun to recognize. The hunters were gone, or at least scattered, fleeing into the night with fear in their eyes, carrying back stories that would become legend. The storm had passed, leaving rain-soaked stone, broken branches, the acrid smell of smoke and melted metal. And yet, the world had not returned to normal. I had not returned to normal. The silver flame burned still, quiet now, simmering beneath my skin, whispering promises of power, of awakening, of transformation yet to come. I could feel it in every muscle, every sinew, every pulse of blood in my veins. I could feel it calling, demanding, offering, warning. The Alpha's gaze never left me, his presence steady, solid, grounding me in a way that both frightened and thrilled me. I had no words. I had no explanations. I only had the raw, trembling, electric awareness that the world had shifted, irrevocably, and I was at the center of it. And I knew, with every trembling heartbeat, with every pulse of silver fire beneath my skin, that nothing would ever be the same. The ruins were quiet except for the crackle of the fire we had managed to light, smoke curling upward into the cold night air, carrying the scent of wet stone and charred wood. I sat a few paces from him, knees drawn to my chest, eyes tracing the jagged edges of the amphitheater walls, every shadow a memory, every flicker of firelight a pulse that reminded me how alive I still was. He moved slowly, deliberately, not closing the distance but letting me measure the space between us, letting me decide whether I would run or stay. His name was Cassian. Saying it aloud felt like touching something forbidden and precious at the same time. Alpha of the exiled legion. Banished. His voice carried a quiet weight when he told me, a history etched in every syllable. Refusing to slaughter Omegas during the uprising had marked him as a traitor to some, a savior to others. And now, he had chosen to protect me, even knowing that it would mean war. I had survived men who saw only silver coins and chains. I had survived storms and the forest and the fire inside me. But war carried a different weight, a weight that made my stomach knot and my pulse spike. I told him I never asked for his protection, words soft and brittle, like glass in my mouth. I expected anger, impatience, dismissal. But instead, he only smiled faintly, almost ruefully, a shadow of warmth behind his gold-lit eyes. "No," he said, voice low and steady. "But you needed it." I swallowed, feeling my throat tight, a heat rising that had nothing to do with the fire. I looked away, staring at the charred remnants of the amphitheater as though they held answers I could not yet understand. "I've needed a lot of things," I murmured, my voice rough, my fingers trembling. "No one ever stayed long enough to give them." The words carried more than sadness, they carried truth, the kind that could fracture a person if spoken too often, the kind I had kept buried in the deepest corners of my chest. His hand brushed mine, and for the first time in a long time I did not pull away. The warmth of him spread through my fingers, up my arm, into the hollow spaces in my chest that had been empty for so long. It was steady, patient, unyielding in a way that promised safety without chains, protection without possession. It was the kind of touch I had imagined in fleeting dreams, the kind of touch I had never thought I deserved. "You don't have to trust me yet," he whispered, his voice intimate, carrying over the fire, into the quiet spaces where only our breaths filled the air. "Just don't run." I could not. My heart had already begun running toward him, faster than I could catch it, dragging my chest and soul behind it. I felt the pulse of him in the space between our hands, in the quiet weight of his presence, in the unspoken promise that he would not let go, that he would not leave, that he would not ask me to be anything but myself. The wolves circled outside the amphitheater, their gold eyes glinting in the firelight, silent sentinels that mirrored the tension between us. I could feel their power, their loyalty, their recognition of what I was becoming. And in that awareness, I felt my own pulse, wild and trembling, responding to the promise in Cassian's gaze, the warmth of his hand, the depth of something I could not yet name but knew was shaping itself around me. I let my fingers linger against his, the glow from the silver flame inside me flickering faintly at the edges of my palms, as if it recognized the safety, the tether, the fragile trust forming between us. Every breath, every shiver, every tremor of fire and rain in my veins carried me closer, tethering me not only to him but to something larger than fear, larger than survival, larger than the past I had been trying to outrun. Cassian did not speak for a long while, letting the quiet between us stretch, a living thing that throbbed with unspoken words, with acknowledgement, with the first brush of something that might grow into trust. I let my gaze drift to him, memorizing the lines of his face, the strength in his posture, the way the firelight caught the gold in his eyes, and I realized how desperately I had been craving someone who could see me, not the girl my uncle sold, not the girl the world had tried to break, but me, raw, fractured, unrefined, alive. I felt my breath hitch as he shifted slightly, leaning just enough to close the distance without asking, without demanding, and I realized that I had never experienced stillness like this, not in the forest, not in the fire, not in the chaos of the ruins. The storm that had always lived inside me, the fire that had raged beneath my skin, quieted for a heartbeat, responding to the presence beside me, tethered to a trust that was fragile, tentative, and terrifying in its intensity. The night deepened around us, shadows stretching long, embracing the ruins with a softness that belied the violence that had come before. I could feel the damp chill of the stone beneath me, the scent of rain and smoke mingling with the earthy smell of moss and old stone. Everything felt alive, the amphitheater, the wolves, the fire, Cassian, and yet the most alive thing was the thread stretching between us, a fragile bridge of warmth and promise that I was both terrified and desperate to cross. I could feel my chest rise and fall in rhythm with his presence, a subtle, intimate beat that whispered of protection, of patience, of a tether that did not demand surrender but invited connection. I felt the weight of my history pressing against me, the chains, the coins, the market, the fear I had carried like a second skin, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to push it all away. I could exist here, in this space, fragile and trembling and yet acknowledged, not as property, not as a curse, not as a ghost of my past, but as someone who might be allowed to belong. The firelight flickered across his face again, and I saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the careful patience in his eyes, the way he measured his proximity, his warmth, his touch, and I understood without words that this was not just protection. This was choice. This was intention. This was the first fragile step toward trust, toward connection, toward the possibility of something neither of us could yet name. I let my gaze linger, and I felt the pulse of him in the quiet moments between words, the pull of his presence, the tether that wound through the shadows of the amphitheater, through the circle of wolves outside, through the pulse of the silver flame that still thrummed beneath my skin. I had survived chains and fire, storms and men, but this quiet tether, this gentle insistence, this patient warmth, was something I had not known I could survive, something I had not known I could need. I pressed a fingertip against his hand, just lightly, a tentative connection that was neither demand nor surrender, and I felt it ignite a spark, subtle and powerful, threading between us like a pulse of life, of recognition, of fragile, trembling trust. He did not pull away. He did not tighten his grip. He only let it exist, let it breathe, and in that stillness, in that simple acknowledgement, I realized how badly I had been starving for someone who could see me and not flinch, who could hold space for my fire and my brokenness and not try to extinguish either. I could feel the night pressing in, the mist curling at the edges of the amphitheater, the faint whisper of wind through the ruins, and I felt the thread stretch tighter, weaving us together in a rhythm that was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Every breath I took, every shiver that ran through my arms and shoulders, carried me closer to him, tethered me to a presence that was patient, steady, and alive in a way the world had never been. I did not move away when his fingers brushed mine again. I did not hesitate when I felt the warmth of him seep into my skin. I let myself feel it, let the fragile trust grow, let the pulse of connection strengthen even in the shadow of uncertainty, even in the knowledge that danger was never far away, that the world still demanded fear, that my fire still raged beneath my veins. I let myself exist in the quiet of the amphitheater, tethered to a man who had not demanded me, who had not claimed me, who had only held space and waited for me to take the step. And I did. I let my heart begin to run toward him, even as my mind whispered caution, even as the shadows of my past reached for me, even as the silver flame flickered and pulsed beneath my skin. I let myself trust, even if only for a moment. I let myself lean into the warmth, into the patient, steady pull, into the silent promise that this connection, fragile, trembling, raw, was mine to explore, mine to hold, mine to nurture. The wolves outside shifted, golden eyes glinting in the firelight, reflecting the bond forming in the quiet, reflecting the tether that connected us not just to each other but to something larger, something ancient, something unbroken. I felt the pulse of them in my bones, the pulse of him in my veins, the pulse of fire and silver threading through every fiber of me, and I understood, for the first time in my life, what it meant to have someone stay, to have someone see, to have someone hold space for the fragments of a soul long abandoned and finally recognized. The night stretched on, quiet, intimate, charged with the electricity of trust forming, with the weight of potential, with the trembling promise of a connection that neither of us fully understood yet neither of us could deny. I did not speak, I did not move, I only let myself exist in that space, tethered to him, tethered to the fire, tethered to the first fragile heartbeat of something that could be love, could be trust, could be home. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not run. The night was heavy, the kind of darkness that presses against your chest, that fills your ears with the sound of nothing but your own heartbeat. I woke to emptiness, Cassian gone, the warmth I had clung to vanished, leaving a cold hollowness behind. My chest tightened, a slow, creeping panic curling around my ribs, the way it always did when I realized that everything I thought I could trust was gone. The fire we had left behind in the amphitheater had burned down to embers, leaving shadows that twisted across the ground like old ghosts. I stepped outside, shivering, not from cold but from the sickening twist of dread that had gripped my stomach. Torches burned in the distance, dozens of them, their flickering light casting the trees into jagged, menacing shapes. My throat tightened, my lungs refused to work as the realization slammed into me, hunters, again, and this time, he was among them. Cassian stood at the forefront, his posture rigid, his cloak catching the firelight in odd flashes that made him look both human and something else, something untouchable. My chest caved in, the weight of disbelief and betrayal pressing against me until it hurt to breathe. Cassian? My voice cracked, brittle, disbelief layered over the raw ache in my ribs. His eyes avoided mine. There was no fire in them now, no warmth, only the pale, resigned steel of a man who had made a choice he hated. I had no choice, he said quietly, his voice low but carrying across the open space. They have my pack. My brothers will die if I don't deliver you. My throat burned. Rage and pain clawed their way up from my gut, wrapping around my words, choking them, shaping them into something sharp. So you sold me again. The words were nearly a whisper, trembling with disbelief and fury, carrying every memory of chains, of coins, of a childhood stolen and sold repeatedly into this one accusation. The hunters moved forward, closing in like a tide of iron and malice. I tried to step back, but silver chains materialized from nowhere, binding my wrists tightly, biting into my skin with cruel precision. Pain flared through me as they dragged me forward, toward their counsel, toward judgment, toward the men who had always seen me as nothing more than a coin, a curse, a vessel for fear. The council roared as I was thrust before them, their torches illuminating faces twisted with greed, with awe, with the same fear I had come to recognize over and over. One shouted, voice raw with terror and excitement, "She is the child of Seriphus. The curse reborn." The words tore through me, a reminder of everything I had tried to bury, everything I had tried to deny, everything I had spent my life surviving. Pain blossomed along my arms where the silver chains bit, burning, cutting into me, and for a moment, I thought I would collapse, thought I would cry, thought I would beg like I always had. But then something deeper stirred, something that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The silver flame pulsed beneath my skin, hot, alive, urgent, and it responded to the chains, to the fear, to the injustice. I closed my eyes, feeling it coil in my chest, rising, stretching, expanding until it could no longer be contained. Light erupted from me, not timid, not small, but all-consuming, blinding. The night shattered, the torches dimmed against its brilliance. The hunters screamed, stumbling, shielding their eyes, their hands useless against the radiance that poured from me. The chains burned, not with pain, but with fire that purified and melted them into nothing. The ground trembled beneath my feet, the ruins around us shaking with the power I could now feel coursing through every vein, every sinew, every heartbeat. I opened my eyes. The first time in my life, I did not feel fear. I did not feel small. I did not feel like a girl stolen, sold, broken, and used. I felt vast, infinite, and dangerous. I felt like fire made flesh. I let the light flow freely, letting the silver flame rise until I was no longer a girl in chains. I was reckoning, I was the storm, I was the force the world had tried to cage for generations. Cassian staggered back, his eyes wide, disbelief etched into every line of his face. He had seen me in fire before, had felt my power, had tethered to it in awe, but this was a reckoning. I was no longer tethered to fear. I was untamed, unbroken, and alive in ways he had never imagined. The council screamed again, trying to flee, but the light was everywhere, twisting through the ruins, licking the walls, the ground, the shadows, until the night itself seemed to fold and tremble under my power. The silver flame coursed through my veins, through the air, through the bones of the mountains themselves. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental: I was not a curse. I was not a child to be sold or feared. I was the reckoning that history had whispered of, the force that had been waiting for centuries to rise, and I would not be chained again. My voice rose, steady, unflinching, filled with fire and fury and something purer than any fear I had ever known. "I am not your curse," I said, and the words rang across the ruins like a bell tolling the end of an age. "I am your reckoning." The light pulsed with my declaration, answering me, shaping me, claiming the power that had always been mine and giving it form, giving it voice. I felt the chains that had bound me in the past, the chains of my uncle, the chains of the market, the chains of fear and survival, shatter into dust, scattered on the wind and carried away by the silver flame that now roared through me. Cassian fell to his knees, the first tremor of recognition in his eyes, mingling with despair, and I saw the man I had trusted, the alpha I had felt tethered to, crumble before the immensity of what I had become. He reached for me, but I did not meet his hand. My power, my fire, my silver-tinged blood was not for mercy, not for pardon, not for him. It was for me, and for the centuries of suffering I had endured, and for the world that had tried to own me, and now would know my wrath. The hunters' torches sputtered and went out under the weight of the silver flame. Shadows recoiled. The ruins shook. The wolves circled outside, sensing the shift, their gold eyes reflecting the light, reverence and fear and recognition in their gaze. I could feel them in my bones, in the marrow of my limbs, the pulse of the wild answering the pulse of fire within me. I was not alone. I was never alone. I stepped forward, the light streaming from my hands, rolling across the ground, bending around my form until I stood at the center of it, unflinching, unbroken, untouchable. Every word, every scream, every trembling gasp of the council, of the hunters, of Cassian, pressed against me, but I did not falter. The silver flame was no longer a flicker. It was a roar. It was a storm. It was mine. My heart pounded, fierce and relentless, a rhythm that matched the light and the tremor of the ground and the pulse of the wolves at the edge of the ruins. My throat was raw, my lungs burned, but my voice did not waver. The chains of my past had been destroyed, and in their place rose something infinite, something unstoppable, something that would never kneel, never beg, never be sold again. I turned my gaze to Cassian, to the man who had betrayed me, to the one whose eyes had once been home. And I did not see the Alpha I had known. I saw fear, awe, and the realization that he had underestimated what I was. I saw the cost of his choices reflected in the fury that now radiated from me in every silver-tinted breath, every pulse of fire, every trembling heartbeat. The ruins shivered, the night screamed, and I realized that I had crossed the line from fear to power, from victim to force, from girl to reckoning. The silver flame burned through me, around me, and beyond me, claiming the night, claiming the world, and claiming me. I was no longer the girl who had been sold for 50 coins. I was no longer the frightened child hiding behind stones and shadows. I was the storm, the fire, the silver that could not be caged, and for the first time in my life, I did not beg. I did not plead. I did not hide. I simply rose, trembling and radiant, and let the world see me. The world had made a mistake. They thought they could cage me, control me, bend me. They thought fear could hold me. They thought betrayal could break me. They were wrong. I was not their curse. I was their reckoning. The ground beneath me trembled, cracked, shivering with anticipation, as if the mountains themselves had been waiting for this moment. Every heartbeat, every pulse of silver fire coursing through my veins, reverberated into the earth, shaking loose centuries of fear, oppression, and whispered curses. Lightning tore across the sky, striking the altar where they had planned to end me, the metal and stone shattering into sparks that hissed and smoked. The heavens seemed to bend, to lean in, to witness what I had become, as if the world itself acknowledged the shift, the rise, the reckoning that could no longer be contained. Cassian fell to his knees, rain and sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, gold eyes shining with shame and disbelief. He could not speak, yet his chest heaved with every tremor of regret. I thought I was saving them, he said, voice raw, faltering, but I destroyed everything. Every word landed like a hammer, echoing through my chest, but they carried no fear, no despair for myself. I looked down at him, feeling the surge of the silver flame answering every broken fragment of my past, every betrayal, every wound. No, I said, voice steady, radiant with power that had once terrified me. You didn't destroy me, you freed me. I lifted my hands, and the light poured forth, no longer flickering, no longer hesitant. It rolled over the battlefield, a living river of silver and flame, scorching the earth, bending the night, unmaking the terror that had been sent to consume me. Weapons melted to ash in the hands of the hunters, chains disintegrated, their screams swallowed by the roar of light, until only silence remained, profound and absolute. The storm seemed to pause, the wind stilling to witness, and the moon, high and impossibly bright, turned silver above me, casting the battlefield in a divine glow. I could feel her then, the first Luna, the mother of flames, the voice that had whispered in my blood for so long. She threaded through my veins, through the silver flame, through the ache of every lost year and every stolen moment. Her voice was not words but essence, a vibration, a pulse of destiny. You are the chosen flame, it whispered, stirring every ember of strength, every fragment of power, into one cohesive, unstoppable force. I closed my eyes, letting the storm of fire and light consume me, letting the flame rise, expand, and fold into every inch of my being. Pain transformed into clarity, sorrow became strength, betrayal became a crown of silver light over my head. I was no longer the girl bound in chains, sold, hunted, whispered about in fear. I was the Luna reborn. The flame answered me, the flame was me. My body thrummed with it, radiating outward, uncontainable, divine, fierce, and beautiful in its raw perfection. The hunters fell back instinctively, and I did not stop them with mercy. I stopped them with inevitability. The light wrapped around their panic and dissolved it, not with cruelty but with assertion, with the undeniable truth that I was no longer to be used, no longer to be feared, no longer to be controlled. Every ember of the past. The chains, the jeers, the silver coins that had once bought me, turned to smoke and was carried away by the wind. Cassian remained on his knees, gold eyes brimming with awe, shame, and a raw, unspoken adoration. I could feel him reaching for me with his heart, with his regret, with the tether that had once bound us in fragile trust, and yet I did not move toward him immediately. I let the silver flame pulse, letting him witness, letting him understand that the girl he thought he knew had been replaced by something far greater, far more untouchable. I took a step forward, and the light followed me, radiating from every pore, bending reality around me, commanding attention, respect, fear, and reverence all at once. The ruins of the battlefield, scorched and battered by rain and fire, seemed to recognize me as sovereign. Wolves at the edge of the clearing circled, eyes glowing like molten gold, howling in acknowledgement of the Luna reborn, their cries vibrating through the ground and into my chest. I drew the sound in, let it mingle with the silver flame, let it fuse with my heartbeat. I was not alone. I had never been alone. Cassian lifted his gaze slowly, awe and longing warring in every line of his face. He could see it, finally, the rebirth, the divinity, the fire I had contained for years and now claimed fully. I felt the thread of connection between us, fragile but persistent, and for the first time it did not make me hesitate. But I did not need him to anchor me. I needed no anchor. I was the storm, the light, the flame that would not be subdued. I was the Luna, not a child, not a sacrifice, not a pawn. The air itself seemed to hum with recognition. The mountains held their breath. The sky bent in reverence. The silver flame surged, coiling and twisting through my veins, and I let it lift me, let it claim me, let it define me. My hair whipped around my face in the wind, the rain slicking it to my skin, but I did not flinch. Every drop of water, every ember of light, every shiver of the ground beneath me became part of me, part of the transformation. I was complete. The hunters faltered again, sensing not just power but inevitability. There was no pleading, no bargaining, no escape. I let the light pulse through my fingers, through my palms, through the space around me, letting them understand without words that I was the reckoning, the force that could not be restrained, that could not be controlled, that could not be denied. I was not their sacrifice. I was the storm that ended the need for sacrifice. I was the flame that consumed fear itself. I opened my eyes, silver fire blazing within them, and looked across the battlefield. Every ounce of the fear, the betrayal, the chains, the stolen years, the false trust, melted in that gaze. I saw Cassian's awe, his pain, his longing, but I did not falter. I let the silver flame roar, let it pour from me, letting the sky itself bend to witness, letting the moon reflect back my divinity in pure, blinding silver. Every muscle in my body hummed with power, every nerve on fire with awareness, every thought crystal clear in the storm of light. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer seeking permission. I was not a girl sold for coins. I was not a pawn in any scheme. I was the Luna reborn. The divine, untouchable, infinite flame of destiny made flesh. The ground beneath me split once more, responding to the magnitude of what I had claimed. Lightning flared across the sky, thunder rolling like applause, echoing through the mountains, announcing my arrival, my claim, my rebirth. Every creature, every living thing, every force that had watched me rise trembled in recognition. I took a deep, deliberate breath, feeling the storm of the silver flame settle into a rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat that was mine and mine alone. I was fierce. I was divine. I was unbound. I had survived betrayal, chains, fire, and death itself, and now I was whole. I had turned every wound into power, every memory into strength, every scream into fire. I was the Luna, and the world would remember my name. As dawn crept over the ruins, the world seemed fragile, almost holding its breath. The night's chaos had faded into quiet smoke curling against the pale light, and the scent of damp earth mixed with ash. I stood among the ruins, the wolves at my side, their golden eyes reflecting the first streaks of sun. The fire inside me no longer roared uncontrollably, it had settled into a steady pulse, a rhythm that was mine and mine alone. I could feel every tremor of the earth beneath my feet, every heartbeat of the creatures around me, every whisper of the wind. Cassian approached slowly, cautious, as if afraid that any sudden move might shatter the fragile connection between us. His eyes, gold still, carried exhaustion, shame, and something unspoken, something raw. "What happens now?" His voice broke, carrying the weight of all he had done, all he had feared, all he had witnessed. I turned toward the rising sun, letting the light touch the silver flame that still pulsed beneath my skin, letting the warmth settle in my bones. "Now, the world learns who I am." My voice was steady, commanding, threaded with power and inevitability. There was no hesitation. The girl who had been sold, who had been hunted, who had been betrayed, no longer existed. Only the Luna reborn remained, radiant and untouchable. A voice echoed inside my mind, familiar, tender, a whisper from the past that carried love I had nearly forgotten. My mother's voice, steady and warm, filled the spaces in my chest that had once ached with longing. "You were never cursed, Lyra. You were chosen to remind them what mercy feels like." The words settled over me like a cloak, gentle and commanding at once, and I felt the silver flame respond, rising, bending around me in reverent acknowledgement. I turned my gaze to the horizon, letting the wind whip through my hair, letting the wolf's howls answer the pulse of my heart, and whispered, low, deliberate, and unbroken, "Then let them come." The words carried both challenge and promise, a tether of fate thrown across the unknown, daring anyone who would oppose me to step into the light of what I had become. The sun lifted higher, gilding the ruins in gold, reflecting off the remnants of silver light in my hands. Every shard of memory, every scar, every betrayal, every act of cruelty I had endured transformed into fire, into power, into presence. I could feel Cassian standing behind me, hesitant but tethered, his guilt and awe mingling with something like longing. He had seen what I could be, and yet he had not dared to imagine the full scope of it until now. And yet, even in the quiet, in the rising warmth of morning, I could feel the pulse of the world shifting, as if the earth itself had noticed my rise. There was promise, there was danger, and there was the silent, insistent knowledge that this power I now claimed would not go unchallenged. The silver flame pulsed faster, a reminder that I was not just alive, I was inevitable. The wind shifted, carrying scents unfamiliar, heavy, potent with something ancient, malevolent, a presence that made the air tighten and my veins hum. The subtle tremor beneath my feet spoke of forces gathering, of power waiting, of destiny yet unfinished. I felt it coil inside me, a recognition that my rebirth had not been the conclusion. It was the prologue, the spark that would ignite the world. From the shadows, a voice whispered, low and amused, sliding across the remnants of stone and ash. "She is not the only one with the mark." The words wrapped around me like a cold promise, sharp and deliberate, setting fire to my nerves, igniting caution alongside the thrill of power. My silver flame pulsed hotter, a living force that answered, aware and unbroken, a warning and a herald all at once. I clenched my fists, letting the power surge through every fiber, shaping my resolve, sharpening my focus. The wind swirled, the wolf's eyes glinted like molten gold, and the ruins themselves seemed to recognize the inevitability of what was coming. I was no longer a pawn, a victim, or a shadow of someone else's desire. I was the Luna, unbound, radiant, untouchable. I took a deliberate step forward, letting the morning light wash over me, letting the pulse of the silver flame anchor me to the earth, to the wolves, to the force that had always been mine. My chest rose and fell in rhythm with the wind, with the heartbeat of the pack, with the tremor beneath my feet, and I knew with absolute certainty that my story was not ending here. Cassian remained close, cautious, tethered to me by loyalty and something deeper, something I could not yet name. I could feel the weight of his awe and his guilt, and I understood without words that he had witnessed not just power, but transformation. He had seen me claim everything that had been stolen, and the quiet acknowledgement between us spoke of tethered fates, fragile trust, and the beginnings of something that neither fear nor betrayal could break. And yet, the whisper from the shadows lingered in my mind, a cold, deliberate thread winding through the warmth of sunrise and fire. Someone else bore the mark. Someone else carried the potential to challenge, to oppose, to ignite what I had begun. The silver flame pulsed again, hotter, alive, a reminder that destiny was not solitary, that power alone did not guarantee victory, and that the world was vast, unrelenting, and full of surprises. I turned my gaze toward the horizon once more, letting my hair whip in the wind, letting the wolves circle closer, letting every pulse of fire and silver settle into rhythm with my heartbeat. My eyes glowed faintly, silver fire reflecting the dawn, my presence both beacon and warning. I was fierce. I was divine. I was inevitable. The ruins lay around me, silent witnesses to the storm I had become. The ashes of the battlefield whispered of the chaos I had endured and the power I had claimed. The silver flame wrapped around me like a crown, the wind carried my name, and I understood that every choice I had made, every act of courage, every fragment of pain, had led to this moment. I could feel Cassian's presence behind me, tethered but respectful, his own strength and loyalty tempered by the awe of what I now represented. I did not need him to define me, to guide me, to anchor me. I was not his to protect, to control, to bind. I was mine. And in that ownership, in that certainty, in that raw, untouchable power, I felt the full weight of destiny, of prophecy, of something ancient finally bending to recognize me. I whispered, almost to myself, almost to the wind, almost to the silver flame itself, let them come. The words carried beyond fear, beyond hesitation, beyond mercy. They carried inevitability. They carried judgment. They carried the first tremors of a future no one had dared to imagine. The world had begun to shift under the weight of my declaration. The ruins, the wolves, the wind, the distant mountains, they all seemed to acknowledge the rise of something unstoppable, something sacred, something that would not be denied. I was not a sacrifice. I was the force that would end the need for sacrifice. I was the Luna reborn. And I knew, with the quiet, shivering certainty of someone who has claimed every piece of herself, that this story was not ending. It was only beginning. The silver flame pulsed again, hotter, faster, brighter, and I felt the promise of power, the pull of destiny, and the whisper of challenges yet to come. The horizon burned in gold and silver, and the world waited, silent, for the first steps of the Luna reborn.